Hey, Christopher, here. Let's talk about a few issues that Gerald brought up relating to the layout. So here are some screenshots from testing, and you'll notice that this button is a little bit all over the place. So let's go through them one by one. So here on tablet, the button is sticky to the bottom. So for mobile and tablet, that's generally good, but it should have a maximum width restriction here. So it not should go the full width. And I think we have that here in our layout rules. So 300 pixel maximum width for solo buttons. So that's good there. Okay. Then here, same thing with the width. Now this is on mobile Android, on portrait, which is generally always a little bit tricky. So the thing is that the button is sticky to the bottom, and then it just kind of overlaps the content, and there's just a very narrow area here, kind of like this, that is actually for visible content, and then this area down here is just covered up by the button. Then similar here in this multitasking view, I think. So we get kind of these really condensed views where I don't know if the app is really going to be usable in that regard. Certainly not the onboarding experience. I think once we're in the block lock, I think that'll be fine. But this onboarding experience is just not good. But however, we need to come up with rules for this button here at the bottom. So let's go through here real quick. So we have on desktop, the buttons generally it sits in line with the content, not sticky, normal. You can, if your screen's kind of like that, you just have to scroll down, right? Then for mobile, the default is that it's sticky to the bottom, which here's an ultra long screen, which doesn't exist. There's a more realistic one. And here's kind of this edge scenario here where the content and button basically fit in. Now, if you make it a little bit smaller here, then what do? We have two options. Either we continue as the same logic, the button sits at the bottom of the screen, and I think instead of showing the text behind this button area, which I think you see here a little bit, I think it would be better if we actually cover that up. Like there's a black box behind it. Let me see if I can grab that real quick. Yep. So instead of this, we're going to do this. So I think that's one option. But it doesn't really solve these situations where you basically don't have anything, can't see anything, because there's just a lot of space wasted. So we may want to introduce another option here. The first thing that we need though, and from our conversation, I don't think this is implemented, is that we just show scroll bar at some point where I can just scroll up and down. So this, in this case, kind of this is the content window here. And if the content itself goes outside of that, it's not visible, but I can scroll up and down. And I have my top and bottom fixed bars. So that would be a logical continuation of what we have here on the left. So the alternative is that we can introduce, whether we do that for desktop, for at what point we introduce that, and whether we introduce it, that's up to debate. So we could say that at a certain size, the button is not sticky anymore, but it just kind of goes back to desktop mode where it fits, where it's in line with the content. So for example, a really, really narrow screen, something like this here, I just see a bit of content, and then I would have to scroll down. And then when I scroll down, it doesn't work here right now. Let me see if I can make it work. It's this one. Okay, let me see. So, for smaller screens, I just have to scroll to the bottom to get to this button. So we could potentially come up with a rule where, this is generally good. We kind of stick with this here where it overlaps. So for example, this is roughly the iPhone SE size. So we still want sticky button, but let's say we go to a scenario like this here, where we have this, where we're either in landscape or we just have a really, really short screen in height that we just make the button inline again. So that is an option. Another practical thing to do here, which this area here, it's typically reserved for kind of this bar down here, and on iPhone, on iOS, which this application is not built for, we're gonna have this type of bar here. I'm wondering if this is shown kind of a multitasking screen, if we can also shorten this distance here, if that's something that's possible. But yeah, I mean, either way, it's always, there'll always be some tricky areas where here you have, I don't know, how much is this? You have 180 pixel height, app height. It just won't be, it'll just be barely usable. And I've also encountered scenarios where applications are just, the rotation is disabled on landscape because it's just not usable. But, generally, I don't think this particular scenario is a huge deal, because this is not the main app functionality. This is just the intro screen, the onboarding screen. A user can very simply go back to portrait mode, interact with the applications, and then maybe go to a landscape for the block clock if they just want to have it displayed somewhere. But, like I said, I think we could introduce this point where at a certain height here, where we switch over back to this inline layout option, and then we introduce the scroll bar, and then we also give this a background, this button area here, and potentially we can see if there are certain scenarios where we reduce the padding here at the bottom. It's a lot of complexity for this logic, so let me know if this makes any sense or not. Curious to hear your thoughts. Thanks.